So I would like to say good morning, good afternoon and evening to all participants from the participating across the globe. And briefly, it has been discussed by the Ashish Burua about the study and our linkage with the project. Today, we're going to discuss about the climate resilient livelihood of climate vulnerable communities. So let's start with the background. As we know, that Bangladesh is recognized as a worldwide as one of the most vulnerable country to the impact of climate change, and this is due to its unique geographic location, dominance of floodplains, and low elevation from the sea, and overwhelming dependence on the nature, which also no longer meet that actually happening all region of the globe, and it's not also exception in the Bangladesh. And particularly focus on the two areas where we are working currently. Khulna and Bagherhat districts are more vulnerable and victim of climate change, and both districts' livelihood were reported to be severely impacted by the cyclone storm surge. Besides, coastal flooding, severe rainfall, sanitation are the additional factor due to the fact that two districts are located within the same region, and most frequent climatic threat as well as the resulting loss and damage are relatively comparable in the both. And these districts have seen considerable losses in crops, land, soil salinity, nutrition, and soil fertility. However, proportion of loss and damage shared mostly equal in these areas, and these districts also suffer from a lack of food access and affordability, including the water scarcity. So addressing the issue, there must be need increase the climate resilience of most vulnerable poor rural population of the southeast coastal region of Bangladesh by adapting and improving capacity in food and water security. And if I say specifically to ensure the accessing affordable service to enhance the food security and safe water access, consequently the climate resilient livelihood of the climate vulnerable community. So we moving into the objective of the study, particularly the study conducted to understand the get of the information pre-existing condition in the project location and the community. And specifically, there were two specific objectives. Firstly, to set the baseline value based on the project expected outcome as described in the log frame, which represent the beneficiary's current status existing state in the research area. And secondly, on the accordance with the project outcome, explore climate change concern and community-based resilience in the project area. So in this part, I will stop, and I would like to invite my fellow colleague from the ICCCAD, Sardar Shafiqul Islam, to present the methodology section. So Shafiq bhai, please join with us to share briefly the methodology section.
Thank you, Manjurul Islam bhai, for your brief introduction about the project and the objective of the project. I'd like to mention the study methodology here. And you know, the study, you can see in the map, the study area is located southeast coastal region in Bangladesh, which is the one of the most vulnerable region due to climate change identified in Bangladesh. And in that region, the project study area is fall in two districts. One is a Khulna and another is Bagherhat. In Khulna district, we have selected two upazilas, and in Bagherhat we have selected one upazila, which was selected earlier phases of the projects. And these three upazilas, we have identified 14 unions, and the 14 unions we have included in the conducting the study. Can you go for the next slide, please? Okay, the study methods we use in the mixed method is both qualitative and quantitative method we used for gathering the data. And the data was collected through key informant interviews, focus group discussion, and household surveys. And the sampling procedures we followed for this study, the study area selected purposefully based on the previous phase intervention of the Pani Ujjavan project. A survey respondents selected based on simple random sampling procedures, and focus group discussion and key participants selected following the purposive sampling ways. And the data collection methods, we already mentioned the qualitative method used the key informant interview. 12 interviews per Upazila. Upazila means sub-district in our those who know understand the Upazila, and the 30 key informative interview we have conducted for this study, and the total 24 focus group discussion, 8 focus group discussion per Upazila, and 4 of them are men and 4 are women. That means the 50% focus group discussion was men and 50% for females. And the quantitative methods, we include the household surveys, approximately 60 to 90 households per Upazila, and the total 211 households we have selected randomly for gathering the data. And also we have reviewed the secondary literature and documents as well. Please, okay, the data management and data management analysis and implementation process. The primary data and data analysis process was disaggregated particularly by the geographical location and sex of the target beneficiaries. And the quantitative data were analyzed using the descriptive statistics methods in Microsoft Excel software, and we have used the we have shared the findings through generating the tables and graphs. And the content analysis was done with the quantitative and qualitative data. And the during the data collection, and we have used the ethical consideration. We have maintained the ethical consideration. Consent was taken from the respondent, and respondent's identity kept restricted, and data and information only used for reporting purpose only. We did not disclose any of their identity. I think that's all from my side, and I would like to request the Manjul Islam Bhai to share the findings of the study.
Okay, thank you so much, Shafiq Bhai, for sharing briefly the methodology section. So I would like to go through the all the findings. So our next portion will be the focus on the key findings of this study. And initially, we actually describe about the socio-demographic feature of the respondent, particularly this age structure. The average age of the respondent was 40 years with the range of 18 to 87 years. And among the all the participants in the study, roughly equal number of males and females were surveyed, where 50% were males and 49 were females. And majority of the respondent falls into the 35 to 45 and 25 to 35 age group, and these are 43% and 29% respectively. The male and female average was age was 45 and 37 years correspondingly, and the average number of member each household was 4.7%. So now I would like to focus on the occupation of the respondent. The primary occupation of most is the business, which is 30%, followed by the farming, which is 21%, and day labor, which indicating 24%. Beside all of these, fishing, carpenter, van driver, teachers also found in the study. In addition, among those respondents, most of the female were housewives. So I will would like to go for a next finding is about the climate hazard in the study area. So as we are conducted Khulna and Bagherhat district, so we focus separately in these two districts. The livelihood and Khulna and Bagherhat are found to be most affected by the cyclone with storm surge. Other include the flood intrusion and heavy rainfall, salinity intrusion. All the respondents of Bagherhat said that they are vulnerable to the hazard they mentioned, and similar percent of respondents in Khulna and Bagherhat experience the same thing. If we look in the pie charts, we can say that in Khulna and Bagherhat for this area, cyclone reported by the respondent, that is same 20%. Coastal flood and high tide is about 16% in Khulna and 19% in the Bagherhat. And heavy rainfall in Khulna is about 17% and Bagherhat 12% respectively. And besides salinity intrusion and river erosion, mostly sharing the same percentage in the both area. The hazard of the natural disaster actually cannot be completely prevented in the coast area, but it can be reduced the intensity of the risks and the damage. So I'm moving into the next slide. Is about the loss and damages. So respondents were asked about the loss and damage context, a different question about their current experience. So one of the particular area of this baseline was focused on loss and damage aspect in the community experience. It has been found due to climate change, loss and damage change happening in large scale in the coastal area, particularly these two districts. And they experienced that cropland damage 21% in Khulna and 70% in Bagherhat. Soil fertility also affected. In Khulna, it was counted 18% and Bagherhat is about the 14%. And salinity nutrition causes loss in Khulna 70% and 13% in Bagherhat. Besides the family crops, food accessibility, food affordability also significantly hampered, counted under loss and damage scenario in the coastal area. And in this point, I would like to share the community voice that we would like to hear some community voice who can share their very own experience from their ground reality in terms of loss and damage aspect. So I would like to invite Fahima Khatun, who is the one of producer group president from our project. She is currently located in Koira Shodor Union, Koira Upazila of Khulna district. So I would like to invite her to share experience from the ground.
আসসালামু আলাইকুম, আমি মুসাম্মদ ফাইমা খাতুন, খুলনা জেলা কয়রা উপজেলা কয়রা সদর ইউনিয়ন উত্তর মদিনাবাদ একজন নারী কৃষক। আমাদের এলাকায় জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন, প্রাকৃতিক দুর্যোগের কারণে লবণাক্ততা বৃদ্ধি পেয়েছে, যার কারণে আগে অনেক ফসল উৎপাদন হতো, এখন অনেক কৃষি ফসল উৎপাদন কমে গেছে লবণাক্ততার কারণে। যার কারণে আমাদের এলাকায় যারা কৃষি কাজ করে তারা দিনমজুরি ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ কাজ করতে বাইরে চলে যায়। আমরা যারা কৃষক আছি তারা কৃষি অফিসারের সাথে যোগাযোগ করে পরামর্শ করে উন্নত পরিমাণের প্রযুক্তি পরিমাণ বীজ ব্যবহার করে যাচ্ছে, যার কারণে এলাকায় লবণাক্ততার কারণে সবজি ফসল উৎপাদন কমে গেছে, হচ্ছে না আর কি তেমন। তাতে করে আমাদের এলাকায় প্রতি বছর দুর্যোগের কারণে আমরা ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়ে যাচ্ছি। ধন্যবাদ সকলকে। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
Thank you, Fahima Khatun, for sharing her very own experience. If I summarize her discussion, it can be said that due to the salinity in the coastal area, the crop production significantly getting lower and lower. So it is very challenging for them, but they are still trying to coping with the situation by taking the help of the local key actors in terms to support their crop production. So we going to our next finding. Is about the access to community-based water facilities. So firstly, I like to say the coastal community household highly dependent on the community-based water facility, and this study respondents are asking about their access in the community-based water facility. Based on their response, we found that almost 3% overall response are nearly half. If you see in the finding, overall responses from the field in Koira Upazila, access to water-based community-based water facility was 50%. Beside Paikgas, it was 45%, and Morolganj, it was 47%. Among these findings, we were further asked our respondent regarding the specific sources. The responded that in Koira, Paikgas, and Morolganj Upazila, all the responses were counted based on the multiple responses from the household head. Majority of the household access to the community pond for their water utilization. In Morolganj, it was 34%, in Koira it was 28%, in Paikgas it was 18%. Secondly, rainwater harvesting also mentioned by the respondent, which indicating the Koira and Paikgas have access 20% and Morolganj it only 12%. Other sources were identified such water tanks, PSF and tube-well respectively in the study area. So moreover, although climate change is grading project has been implemented by the government and the non-government organization, but as a community demand more is not significantly sufficient yet, but there need more intervention and need to identify the suitable option for the local people to formulating pathway adaptation strategy for coping with this water scarcity. So we move into the next finding about access to household level food security. So committee member felt less food security due to the salinity, not only because of the physical impact of salinity on crop production, livestock, aquaculture, but also because of reduced economic opportunity. And it also linked with their livelihood, particularly hot season. Men and women had fewer livelihood option. However, baseline find out the status of the household food access, that is based on the food security component, and household member were asked about the household level food security based on postal context. In Koira Upojela, access to household food security was 41%. Beside in Paikgasa it was 40%, and Morolganj it was 36% respectively. Among the improved food security measures, vegetable cultivation is mostly adopted. It can be said specifically in Koira 30%, in Paikgacha it was 28%, and in Morozganj this is 17%. And in addition, Paikgacha mostly adopted shrimp cultivation, saline tolerant crop cultivation, and whitefish cultivation respectively, whereas Morolganj most of the household adopted shrimp and whitefish cultivation. So this is also counted by the multiple responses. At this point, actually, again, I would like to welcome another community voice to hear their understanding and experience in terms of food and water security scenario. So I would like to invite Faima Khatun, who is a Upazila Vice Chairman from the Moronganj Upazila Porishad under Bagherhat district. Please welcome Faima Khatun and share your experience.
Assalamualaikum. আমি ফাহিমা খানম, মোরগঞ্জ উপজেলা মহিলা ভাইস চেয়ারম্যান, মোরগঞ্জ উপজেলা পরিষদ। আমরা দক্ষিণাঞ্চলে মোরগঞ্জ উপজেলা জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের ফলে এলাকায় বিভিন্ন দুর্যোগ দেখা দেয়, যেমন আমাদের আইলা, বুলবুল এবং সিডারে অনেক ক্ষতি হয়েছে। সেই দুর্যোগ মোকাবিলায় আমাদের এখনো কেটে উঠতে পারিনি। এই প্রাকৃতিক দুর্যোগ ব্যাপক ক্ষয়ক্ষতির সৃষ্টি হয়েছে বলে ক্ষয়ক্ষতির প্রভাব এখনো এলাকার মানুষ সুন্দরভাবে কাটিয়ে উঠতে পারে নাই। তা আমি আর একটি প্রাকৃতিক বৃষ্টির ক্ষেতের ফসল, মাছ, বিভিন্ন কৃষি খাত ক্ষয়ক্ষতি হয়। আমরা কৃষি অফিসারের মাধ্যমে যেমন কৃষি কিভাবে উৎপাদন করতে পারি সেই আলোচনা করে আমাদের সরকারের সেই কৃষি অফিসার আমাদের নিয়ে কৃষকদের নিয়ে কৃষি চাষের সুন্দরভাবে ব্যবস্থা করে। কিন্তু আমাদের একটাই বেশি ক্ষতিকর যে আমাদের নদী ভাঙ্গন, পাইলিং। আমাদের এই নদী ভাঙ্গনটাই আমাদের বেশি ওই উত্তর দক্ষিণ অঞ্চলকে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত করে। জোয়ার ভাটা আসলে যে প্রাকৃতিক আমরা যেটুই কৃষি উৎপাদন করি, মাছ উৎপাদন করি, তার সাথে সাথে আবার বিলুপ্তি হয়ে যায়। তাই এই আবহাওয়া, এই জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনে ক্ষয়ক্ষতি নিরসনের জন্য যে সরকার বিভিন্ন রকমের সাহায্য সহযোগিতা করছে এবং আমরা উপজেলা পরিষদ, আমরা সরকারের যারা দায়িত্বে আছি সেই দায়িত্ব পালন করছি। এবং আরেকটা হয়েছে আমাদের একটাই যে সুপেয় পানির জন্য মোরগঞ্জ উপজেলা খুব অভাবী আছে। তাই সরকার আমাদের মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী শেখ হাসিনা সুপেয় পানির জন্য বিভিন্ন পদক্ষেপ হাতে নিয়েছেন এবং বিভিন্ন পুকুর খনন, খাল খনন, পিএসএফ, অন্যান্য অনেক সরকারের আওতায় নিয়েছেন। কিন্তু বৃষ্টির পানি ধরার জন্য পানির ট্যাঙ্কি সরকারিভাবে প্রত্যেকটা এলাকায় সরবরাহ করছি এবং বিভিন্ন সমস্যা আমাদের এখনো দুর্যোগ কাটেনি, যেমন খরা মৌসুম, বজ্রপাত, বিভিন্ন দুর্যোগ আমাদের এলাকায় সব সময়ের জন্য অনগত। এই দুর্যোগ দিনে জলবায়ুর একটাই শিল্পোন্নত দেশগুলোর জন্য আমাদের ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত জলবায়ুটা বেশি দেখা যাচ্ছে। তাই আমি এই শিল্পোন্নত এই দেশগুলোকে আমরা একটু সাহায্য বা সহযোগিতা এবং দুর্যোগ মোকাবিলার জন্য আমরা যেন একটু ভালো থাকতে পারি, এই আশা রেখে আমি আমার বক্তব্য শেষ করছি। জয় বাংলা জয়। আর কি বলবো?
Thank you so much.
Bonjour bhai, we have the last 5 minutes for the presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the reminder. Okay, thank you, Fahima Khanum, from the Moralganj. Actually, if I summarize her experiences, they actually experience in the community level, that is due to the climatic hazard, they facing the crop losses, and the fish cultivation also hampered, and in additionally the river erosion also the one of the causes that hampering the livelihood also. And beside that, water scarcity, one of the key area they are experiencing currently. But on their view, they also getting some help from the government authorities and government initiative, but those are not sufficient, but expecting more help from the other source also. So these are the scenario from the community level, food and water security. So if we like to move into our next findings, is about the migration tendency. Actually, the migration tendency in due to the climate change is happening in the coastal area, because due to losses of the livelihood, they are forcefully or intentionally and unintentionally migrating to seeking for the alternative livelihood. So if we look at this finding from the 3 upajelas, majority of the respondents are unaware of the migration. Among them, few respondents who are aware of migration, and very few neither plan not to have will migrate. In study area, we found people are willing to migrate due to the climate change, and they mark as potential migrant. It has been seen that in Moralganj is about 16%, in Koira it's about 10%, and it is 7% in Paikgacha. So after this response, we actually seek for the reason for the migration. For the next slide, we will go through the particular reason why they are migrating, the impact due to the impact of climate change. So among those who have migrated, the major reason for primary migration is induced by the climatic hazard, and including the loss of homestead, agriculture, and unemployment. And people are migrated to ensure their safety from threat. The factors responsible for the migration are tidal surge, increases salinity or intrusion, cyclone, river erosion, and waterlogging due to extensive rainfall, making farming difficult and causing unemployment. It is essential to say that we need mark some push and pull factor for the migration reasons. Particularly if we saw from this finding, we can identify some push factor, that is loss of homestead due to the impact of climatic hazard, loss of agricultural land due to the impact of climatic hazard, and no place to work at original village due to climatic impact. And these are the work as a push factor. And if we look into the findings, we identify the better education option and housing facilities, health facilities, better water supply, and safe living from the hazard identified as a pull factor. So these all are the responsible for migrating the another place due to their livelihood alternatives. So these all about our findings. So from this point, actually our discussion will be stimulated further for what will be the actions and what will be the key aspect that we going to be implement or we need to take in. We will learn it from our respected discussant or panelists. So from this point, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Manjul bhai and Shardar bhai, for your nice presentation. And I would like to specifically thanks Fahima Khatun from Koira and Fahima Khanum from Moralganj. It was really mind-blowing to hear the voices from the ground, right? Big hands for you. So we have learned the findings from the study, that how climate change is impacting the people on the ground, how it is affecting the food and water sector, And it is evident actually from the statement of both the voices, right? We can understand the loss and damage on the ground and what it is influencing. So we have learned about climate-induced migration as well because of the loss of livelihood and other factors. So the question is what to do, what Munjul has rightly mentioned here, right? And for this, actually, we'll move to the panel discussion. And in addition to the presentation, there are few brilliant questions already in the chat box. I encourage you all to put your questions here. Hope the panelists will address those. And after the panel discussion, we'll open the floor again with a focus on that points of those questions. So for the panel discussion, I would like to welcome the chair of the session now, Mr. Benjamin Blumenthal, who will be moderating the rest of the session from now onward. So Ben, can you hear us?
Thank you very much, Ashish.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you for facilitating this introduction session. Thank you for the presentation to our two keynote speakers. I think this study shows us a rich results. It is, of course, just a snapshot from a certain area in Bangladesh, but I think this snapshot already leads us to a number of questions that some have already been mentioned in the chat. I am very happy to have three panelists with me. We will look into these results and take it forward. What does this actually then mean for us? And since we are talking about resilience action, what kind of action do we need to take? So I'm very happy to have with me Dr. Khalid Hussain, who is the research fellow at the Department of Human-Centered Computing at the Monash University in Australia. I'm not going into all details, Ashish has already done that. We have also Rupa Mukherjee from Helvetas. She is the director of advisory services of Helvetas, but also, very importantly, a lead contributor, lead author of the latest IPCC assessment report. Not only this one, but already previous ones. And then last but not least, of course, also Professor Dilip Kumar Datta, who is working for the Kulnar University in environmental science disciplines. So we have these three very distinguished panelists with us, and I would like to start with Dr. Hussain Khalid, because he has to leave us, unfortunately, in a few minutes. So I will try to monopolize a little bit his attention before he has to run away. So Khalid, if I may ask you, you have been working in this sector of climate change and the resilience for a long time. How do you see the results of this study? As I said, it's just a snapshot, but how can we now advance on addressing climate change impact?
Yeah,
very concretely.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and my sincere apology, firstly to both Pahima Appas, since you are kind of excluded from the discussion because we are talking in English, but I hope someone is there to translate things for you, and then I need to leave for a meeting, but I will try my best to come back if that finishes early. So as Ben is saying, like, this study is a snapshot. So obviously we need to also see the bigger picture. I sometimes give the example of COVID and comorbidity because COVID is still fresh. So many of you know that, like, when COVID started, we said that, see, those people who have comorbidity like diabetes, asthma, other disease, like, they are more vulnerable due to COVID. They may die. Old people, they may die. Maybe children, they're less vulnerable. So climate vulnerability, it can also increase due to other factors. And sometimes the problem is when we talk about climate vulnerability or climate change related solutions, we try to see things in isolation, in silo. But if we do that, we may create other problems, So there is no scope of looking things in silo when we are talking about climate vulnerability. For example, maybe many of you know that USAID now talks about triple nexus, they're saying that climate vulnerability, you need to look at that along with gender inequality and state fragility. If a state is fragile, if the governance is weak, if we live in a gender unequal society, then those are the comorbidities. When you talk about COVID, those are the comorbidity, and then you have climate vulnerability, and it would become complex. The solution would be really complex. So when we are talking about different solution or even migration here, because I'm starting with the last part of the presentation. If we look at the migration, even climate change and migration, we need to look at that both from push and pull factor. So climate change, obviously, that's a push factor. It pushes people, even if they don't want to migrate, but it pushes them to migrate. But then there are a lot of other factors which also push them to migrate. And governance failure is one of the major reasons. If we even see the refugee crisis now, what's happening in Ukraine, what happened to our next door, like people coming from Myanmar. So that's not a kind of planned migration. That's kind of forced migration. People were forced to leave, and that was kind of a governance failure. So when we talk about climate change and solution, my first point is we can't see that in isolation. We need to see that from a larger perspective, and often it's even going beyond the triple nexus. It's maybe quadruple, quintuple. You need to see the failure of other factors, whether people are struggling to access the natural resources around them. Maybe that's not related to climate change, but that's really pushing them hard to leave the area. Or the gender dimension, like why men they migrate. Like if we talk about gender equity perspective, it's not just about women. We are also talking about what sort of social norms are pushing our men to leave the area. And I've seen Bulu Bhai has already asked the question, like that sort of migration can trigger gender-based violence, in the area, and make the women more vulnerable in that area. So when we look at climate vulnerability, we need to look at things from the failure of acquiring different livelihood capital, the traditional ones we know about, the physical capital, social capital, so all those capitals we know. But when people fail to access those capital or use those capital, they're forced to migrate, and when they have that problem, along with climate vulnerability, it becomes more complex. And then if you consider governance failure, then it becomes more complex. So whenever we're talking about the solution there, we need to see things all together. And that's why resilience has come to the, come to our focus. Like we are now talking about holistic perspective, where climate change is obviously there, but then you work on other factors altogether, so that you just don't focus on, okay, just building a desalination plant in Koira would not solve the problem. It would not just solve a problem in that area. You need to work on other factors, whether the women in that area feel safe enough to go to that water point and collect water. If they can't go there, if social norms don't allow them to do that, there is no point having that intervention in isolation. So you need to even create that sort of agency. You need to create that sort of environment there, which may not look like a climate change action. Sometimes we try to look at innovation, which donors may like. Okay, we need to show them something, but then you need to work on those soft elements there. Otherwise, climate solutions, those would not work. It would, the outcome, that relationship, the male guys are here, they know, like if you don't use it, that there is no outcome there. So you need to create that sort of environment so that people use the outputs which are meant for climate change, and they use that. There is an environment, and then we see the outcomes. And I'm also looking the complex relationships and see the diverse perspective. Even COVID showed us that people migrated from urban areas to rural areas. So we always thought that, okay, people are just coming to urban areas from rural areas all the time, and it's like that. But we saw that in Bangladesh, like during COVID, people moved to rural areas. So that also indicates that migration is not always a solution people choose. When there is a crisis, they like to stay. And last year we also published one paper where we talked about staying as a as a climate adaptation option. So my last point is how you make that happen. We still know that climate change is a reality. People will still be pushed away, and we need to focus on facilitated migration. Facilitated migration means people migrate, but they're ready to migrate. They migrate with skill, not like how people, cross the ocean and go to other countries from Bangladesh. We don't want that sort of, migration. We want facilitated migration where we focus on skills built in the areas where Helvetas or other agencies are working on, so that they work on people's agencies that are skilled. And considering that when people are kind of pushed, they still think that no, we are pushed, but there is also a pull factor there. We have the education, we have the other skill, and we have something to do when we migrate somewhere. So working in the ground in that aspect with a strong gender perspective, with young people, if you work on those things, those may not look like a so-called climate change action, like that skill building and other things, but that would really help them when they consider climate change migration. So ultimately, my point is look at things from a holistic perspective. Sometimes we just focus on climate change solution from a narrow perspective, but we need to go away from that sort of perspective. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you very much for this very interesting view. It's, I think, a key point that you just mentioned or during your intervention is not to just focus on climate change and not just focus on, let's say, a little project, that kind of a plaster approach. Huh? You need to have a bigger view, which goes beyond just the project view and just on community level, which is of course very important for the people directly affected, but it needs also a bigger approach. So if I just add one very short question and maybe a short answer for you from your side. That also means that there is a need for the government to actually intervene. And to take the example here in Bangladesh, the government has, for example, a national adaptation plan, and there is the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. How do you see these kind of government interactions? Is that the right way to move? And also, how can we as civil society, as individuals, as development organizations contribute to this?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for asking that question. I was closely involved with one of the government's climate action plan, climate change and gender action plan. Maybe you may know that like they are now going to review it. And if you look at the implementation of the first version of climate change and action plan, there was no review, there was no follow-up of that action plan. Many agencies even didn't know that like there's a climate change and action plan exists. So from our side, like from development agencies side, I think what we can do is implementing different activities mentioned in those plans, so remaining within the government plan. And in all those plans, there are responsible ministries, like what government is supposed to do. Things are mentioned there. So when we implement things, and if we see that the actions government agencies are supposed to do, they're not doing that, we can take them into account. We can say that, see, we are implementing your plan, which you formulated, and see, we need this support from you. This is in your plan. So if we become part of the plan and then ask them to see, like, you are supposed to do these things, but you haven't delivered that, then you can also make them accountable by referring their own document. So I think that's one way, because these documents are prepared through a long process. ICCCAD is always involved in this sort of process, but then implementation, we always know like how it fails often. So we become part of that, and then we make the government accountable for doing their part in implementing the plan.
Thank you so much for this answer. Since you have to leave, I allow myself to just add a last question. You were just talking that governments need to be accountable. We as a civil society also need to voice, or stand up and then ask this accountability. What would you say is your key message, both to the governments in Bangladesh, but also on international level, to, for example, the COP27 that will come up this year again? What is the key message for climate action that you would like to convey?
I would say we talk a lot about historical responsibility, but we need to look at present responsibility and future responsibility, because historical responsibility or historical actions resulted current situation. So if we don't acknowledge our future responsibility, present responsibility, the problem would continue. So my message is, even to the developing countries, these developed countries who are progressing, don't do the same mistake, obviously. So consider your future responsibility and act accordingly. And those who are historically responsible, obviously, they need to play their part. They need to be part of the solution, and they need to be away from the politics and look at the perspectives of two Mapas who have just voiced the concerns from the ground.
Okay, thank you so much, Khalid, for this key message also to international and national decision makers. May I move over to our next panelist, to Rupa. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for being with us so early in the morning on your side. We're very happy that you are with us. And I would like actually just to continue in the same discussion that Khalid was just mentioning, talking about historical responsibilities also of the developed world, the so-called developed world. There are also questions in this direction from the public that are participating here. You have been, Rupa, a member and lead author of the IPCC report, which I can say also has some rather dire predictions for in which direction we are going. And now you see on the opposite side the results from a very localized area in Bangladesh that was presented at the beginning. How do you make the link between the international level IPCC report and the reality on the ground that we see here?
Thank you, Ben, and that's a great question. And thank you to everybody who presented before me. Very touching statements from the two Mapas. Thank you very much. I compliment also the team for this very relevant study, because the IPCC report for the first time, I think, comes out with very strong findings about the nature of losses that communities are experiencing due to climate change. And I think for the first time, the Working Group 1 report, which looks at the physical science basis for climate change, has used the word that the evidence is unequivocal that human actions are leading to climate change as we are experiencing. And also the conclusion from the report that I worked on, which says that multiple vulnerabilities are coming together. The losses due to climate change and inadequate adaptation are accumulating. And that there are hotspots of vulnerability, as Dr. Khalid Hussain was talking about. Climate change intersects with existing vulnerability in terms of inadequate access to facilities or high reliance on natural resources for livelihoods. So this report is very conclusive with regard to these hotspots of vulnerability where they intersect. And the fact that adaptation action is grossly inadequate when in comparison to the need. And the reason we are able to make these conclusions is because the IPCC is basically an assessment of existing literature. And studies like the one that was presented now are very important because they provide the evidence base for the IPCC assessment to come to these conclusions. So it's not that we did not know about the importance of equity, fairness, justice. It was just that there wasn't adequate evidence for the IPCC to make these conclusions. And thanks to all of you, people like you who are collecting information, presenting it at forum like this, publishing, etc., conclusions that help to take action in the right direction, that is, more resources for adaptation, more resources flowing to areas where there is existing vulnerability. Also the clarity that there's been a lot of effort on attribution studies, so answering the question of, is this impact really happening because of climate change or because of pre-existing vulnerabilities? And we are now able to clearly say that, of course, they intersect, they come together. And the consequence of that is very drastic. The losses and damages are becoming significant and accumulating. So probably it is not so important to do the most detailed attribution study, but really start working on how people are experiencing the impact and invest the money in adaptation. So all of these conclusions become robust because of the kind of work that you're doing. And such studies, even though small, not very resource intensive, are vitally important for global processes like IPCC.
Thank you very much for highlighting this, that IPCC relies on such studies from the ground, like the one that has been done, so that it can really take into consideration also what happens in the communities. And for this, it is so important that we had also these voices from the communities directly. So it's good to hear that this is feeding into the global discourse. Now, we have heard already now in this discussion, very often we're talking about loss and damage, which then also brings us to the question of compensation. And there was also questions in the chat. Who is supposed to pay for that? And then it comes also, this is also linked then to what we call climate justice. So the global emitters, Khalid talked about it as a historical responsibility from the global emitters, the big emitters, towards those that are really affected by then the climate change. How can we make this link, and how can we create such an accountability mechanism to really make them accountable for their emissions?
So in terms, just as the previous speaker said, there is historical responsibility, but also emissions are growing from the emerging economies, from the developing countries. That's where economies are growing, that's where investment is happening. And we could also see it as an opportunity for doing development in the right way. So what the IPCC report calls, and that's the chapter I worked on, which is climate resilient development, to not make the mistakes of the past again. And it is a greater responsibility because we have much more robust evidence, but also technical options for greener economy, for greener energy, etc. So there is historical responsibility, but there are also current, more resilient development opportunities. And I feel if we focus too much on the former, then maybe we are also losing some opportunities for a better and greener development in the current context. Yeah, so the future responsibility is also important. Now, when we come to ascription of responsibility. This has been recognized from the 1990s as part of the Kyoto Protocol. We had the Annex 1 countries and others. We also had very vibrant carbon markets that were working, but we realized that there was a continuous net increase in emissions. It did not contribute to a net reduction. We are only on an increasing task and on an increasing pathway. So the only way forward would be for every actor to take their responsibility, never to dilute the dimension of climate justice through historical responsibility. That is vitally important. But also to see within our own societies where we have a lot of inequity, we also have a lot of inequity in emissions. So the whole question of climate justice also needs to be broken down within societies. There's an aspect of justice across countries, but also within the country. You probably have that data of how emissions are split across the Bangladeshi society, for instance, and also within the household, because we know there are differential impacts on men and women. They're engaged in different activities. So justice has many dimensions in terms of distributive justice, procedural justice, but also different levels. And I think we find a way forward in the negotiations by everybody contributing to their maximum possibility. At the moment, the negotiations are in the spirit of doing as little as possible. And I think we have to move away from that because we are all together in the same boat, experiencing the same impact. So the mindset has to move to doing as much as we can rather than getting away with as little as possible. Yeah, and I think the purpose of all the IPCC report, all the work that we do at the field is to make this clear that we are interconnected in a common future. There is nothing more global than the atmosphere. And the spirit has to be doing, every actor doing as much as they can to reduce future risks.
Thank you, Rupa, for this strong statement, I would say, to really say we all are responsible and we all have to act. It's not just good enough to say, yes, historically you are responsible and you have to clean it up now. So I think this is very important to always highlight that we have to do as much as possible and not just as little as absolutely necessary to avoid further disaster. So thank you so much for this. Can I go over to Dilip and ask a question to him? We have heard also from the study, but also most importantly from the two interventions from the community, that especially also women are strongly impacted by climate change. And there are a number of questions as well in the chat regarding direct impact on individuals, on women. And so you have been working strongly on looking into women's security under stress environmental conditions. So based on that feedback that we got now in this morning and from the study, how do you reflect on the loss of livelihood of the women that are really concerned?
Thank you, Ben. Actually, I got these questions in advance from Ashish. And thank you, Ashish, for inviting me to this. I'm actually delighted to be here. So many good people and a group and a big number of young people over here. I always like young people. Yes, I understand actually what to be done, what to be talked about. And I would say, better, I will, that's what, Ben, actually, would you please allow me that I will take a chance of talking around 40% in English and 60% in Bangla, because most of these people are from Bengali background, and I always like to talk with them in terms of Bengali. So please allow me that way. But for your understanding, what I'm talking about is very much dependent on locational attributes, because a strong livelihood, in fact, is very much related with a vibrant environment, and then a vibrant environment is very much related with the locational attributes. The area we are talking about, I should say that Professor Rupa Mukherjee and Professor Khalid has taken a good worldwide view of this. You start actually. Is it okay, Ben? Would you listening me?
I think we have some, at least on my side, I have some troubles with the line to understand you properly. It might be just the internet line.
Yes.
So let's hope it stays good. But
Yes.
please continue.
So, since I am there in a village, I think my connection is not very stable. The sound is breaking. Yes. Anyway, then I will talk at a slow beat.
You may just turn off the camera. That may free the network.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately.
That also maybe that also may be good for me. Yeah. Now the thing is that the location we are talking about, preferably we call it the Lower Bengal Delta, because this Satkhira, Khulna, Bagherhat, this part is Lower Bengal Delta. And see, Bengal Delta is a prograding delta. I mean, it is moving towards the south. Now, the characteristics of a prograding delta, as you very much know this, still I am repeating, that there should be salinity over there, since it is very much peripheral to the sea. So, and the coastal, part, you cannot avoid saline water. And number two is that water logging is there. And we actually, we actually call this part of delta is immature delta. Means this land has not been yet developed. এখানের ভূমি এখনো অপরিপক্ক. So what happens with the immature land? That it would not support any livelihood, opportunity, should not, because immature land livelihood support সম্ভব. Then how we can get a vibrant livelihood support system with an immature delta? So I will talk on this. What could be our actions? I will put forward two actions that actually could be a good approach to address the issue of climate change and the issue of food security and the issue of water security. Now, the first issue is that the land has not yet been developed. So whatever things happening over developed land, now how to develop land? See, these rivers are very much different from upstream or riparian upstream rivers. এই নদীগুলো হলো উপকূলীয় নদী. They are open to the sea. So তাদের যে discharge is very similar. সবসময় dischargeটা একই থাকে, because these rivers are open to the sea and very dissimilar with to these rivers in the upper riparian. So when the sediments are settling down on the river bed, that we are losing the volume of the river valley, and the water is same. সো এখানে একজন আমাদের সম্ভবত ভাইস চেয়ারম্যান যিনি ছিলেন উনি বলেছেন নদী ভাঙ্গনের কথা, রিভার ব্যাংক কলাপস। এটা কলাপস হবেই, কারণ যখন ভলিউম ওয়াটার ইজ দি সেম এবং রিভার ভ্যালিটা ছোট হয়ে যাচ্ছে বিকজ অফ সেডিমেন্টেশন, সো ভার্টিক্যাল ডেপথ না থাকার জন্য নদীটা হরাইজন্টালি স্প্রেড করবে, এটাই স্বাভাবিক। তো এখান থেকে মুক্ত হওয়ার জন্য নদীর ডেপথ বাড়াতে হবে। আমরা এরকম একটা প্রসেসকে আমরা বলছি অলমোস্ট যেটাকে বলি নেচার বেসড সলিউশন। আমরা টাইডাল রিভার ম্যানেজমেন্টের কথা বলি। Tidal river management is the process that takes the sediment from the rivers through link canals to the tidal floodplains. And these floodplains are actually starving of sediments. This starvation is just because that we have folded the total southeast Bangladesh, total the Bengal Delta. So this starvation of sediments to the tidal floodplain means while it is subsiding, waterlogging is there. While there is waterlogging, salinity is there. So that's a natural process. So যদি আমরা river sediments গুলোকে link canal, এবং these are examples are there in Bilvaina and Bilpakimara, that the sediments are distributing over there in the tidal floodplains. In fact, such distribution increases the river depth. While by process, we don't need to suffer to this process. And while we are getting more the river depth, and the floodplain is getting the elevation, we are in some way compromising the consequence. And as well as the river is getting depth, navigation is there, aquatic flora and floral enrichment is there, and this water also renews the wetlands much far from the river bank. So this means that the natural resource base is getting more stronger, and when the natural resource base is getting stronger, means there is less migration. যাই হোক, এই ক্ষেত্রে how do this we can empower this women folk.
I'm sorry, Dilip. The line is cutting off, so we can hardly hear you. So I think we should
There's a
try
problem.
to summarize it somehow. This is a very interesting, from what I understand, and I'm not a technician, obviously, that there are also local solutions that can be applied to really have resilience actions to increase resilience. Do I summarize that in just 2 words correctly, Philip? I fear that we have temporarily lost Philip. I hope.
Yeah, now again I am there.
Okay. It's a little bit difficult.
Yes,
but
this is very much disturbing. But anyway,
that we face. We have lost you again. Sorry. I think, unfortunately, because of technical difficulties, but also of time constraints, we should stop here. I'm terribly sorry, Dilip, that technology
anyway, Ben, I'm sorry,
is interfering. Can I just quickly, to round up, ask the panelists that are still here, Rupa and Dilip, the same question that I also asked before to Khalid. What would be your key message that you would like to convey to the COP27 that is coming up? Now, of course, Rupa, as member of the IPCC, you already have a very direct link, but you as an individual, what would be your key message? What kind of resilience action do we need to take to really make things better?
Yeah.
Please go ahead in one sentence.
As Dilip was saying, very interesting input on nature-based solutions. So I fully support these actions. My message to the COP, and I think all of us should resonate that, is that transformative action is needed. So things have to change, right? So migration is one option. It should be an empowered migration. People must have skills and options and make a conscious decision, nature-based solutions, etc. So transformative action is certainly needed, but the poor must not bear the cost of it. And I think that is the strong message we should all carry. So it's a whole of government approach. Local governments have a role, national governments, international cooperation. The cost must not once again be borne by the poor. And that should be our global commitment.
Thank you very much, Rupa, for this strong message. Dilip, I'm still trying to have you back in the discussion. I'm sorry that before it didn't work, but if you can try to convey a key message as well to the decision makers, political decision makers, what would that be? Dilip, are you there? You are muted at the moment. I hope you can hear us. There you are. Okay, great.
Yeah. I just try once more, actually. See, we are trying to empower the women folk in the lower Bengal Delta with ICT. I mean, information and communication technology. They get very much benefited. Our women folk, peasants, even they take knowledge about events, meteorological events. So in our many experimental sites, we find them very much eager to have information in advance. Our experiences have very minimum loss compared with other villages in our lower Bengal Delta. So it really helps them to tackle the extreme events in advance, and in many cases the loss is very much minimized. So now our full effort is to empower the women folk with ICT, and we already got the benefit. Many articles are there. If you are very much interested, I may mail those articles to you as well. Thank you, Ben. I think it's very disturbing while you are not listening me very nicely.
Thank you, Dilip. We try our very best to understand you, but I think this is also a very strong message that you mentioned, to use modern technologies to have good advanced information that helps to minimize and reduce loss, and to make sure that these technologies are getting into the hands of those that need it. So especially also women. So I think this is also a very, very strong message. Thank you so much. I'm terribly sorry for the bad connection, so we could not hear more from you. I would now like to open up the floor again for just asking the same question that I asked to the panelists, to all the participants. I hope that our technology gurus will help me on this. We would like to make a very short survey with you, if you allow, to ask you, or am I jumping forward? Ashish, help me.
So before going for that messages ban, I think we can have a look into the key questions from the participants. I know that some of are already addressed by the panelists, but still we can have a look if there are any significant to add on. And we can even make the floor open for the participants if anyone would like to go live and ask the question to the panelist and the presenter. It's for around 10 minutes.
Okay,
thank you.
Good. Very good. Can you summarize some of the questions, because facilitating as well as reading the questions is a little difficult. So if you have some key questions that have not been addressed yet, that would be nice.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So there are
Ashish, you're muted.
Yes, am I back? Thank you, Didi. So there are a few interesting questions, and I know that some are already addressed, but I'm just going through so that the panelists or the presenters can take the interesting points and add on. So first one is from Amir Khoshru. He was asking that we usually assess the primary impact of climate change, for example, economic loss and damage. What is to do for secondary and tertiary level of impact on the livelihoods, especially on women? I know that Dr. Khalid and Professor has also touched a little, but if anyone would like to add on that. Second one is from Sadia Amin Nira. She says that FIMA is not a one, it's more than millions. So what are the responsible countries or the emitters doing for them as they are liable for this? There are few questions which are close to each other. I'm just reading all that 3 to 4 points. One is from Shah Alam. He asks that what to do to make the Northern powers accountable for their commitment, which they usually commit a lot, but do not account for. Second one is from Taposh, that we know that the loss and damage fund has been initiated by the Scottish government. Are Bangladeshi people like Fahimas going to be compensated? There are two more close questions, probably suggestion as well. The Alok says increased budget from the northern countries, and Fauzia Nusrat asks that who will compensate? So those are very close to each other. Shaukat Chaudhary talks about need-based allocation for climate change adaptation for the southern coastal areas. That's also a suggestion, I understand. Fauzia Khandakar asked a question: do you have any information on GBB of those areas because of climate change? Has domestic violence increased? So we can respond to that. Again, there are a few questions. One is from Sheila. I find that's also an observation. The reason for the migration is that these women are suffering a lot. So please tell me if there's a solution. And two other interesting questions. One is from Shardar Bhai, another is from Mr. Shuvendu. Probably it will go for Professor Dilip Kumar Dotto. The TRM found some positive impacts to reduce waterlogging areas. What to do in reducing the high tide levels in coastal areas? And another point is, what are your suggestions for the young people, those who are losing their livelihoods in the coastal areas of Bangladesh or even the north? So what are the initiatives government should take right now to ensure secured livelihood and others? Thank you, Van.
Thank you. There are a lot of interesting questions, but I'm afraid we will not have time to address all of them. Rupa, may I just hand over the microphone to you to address some of the questions that are related also to the international level? Loss and damage has been mentioned, the funds, who should compensate, these kind of cluster of questions. You may want to add this.
A very, very rich harvest of questions. Thank you very much to everybody. I will make an attempt to address most of them and invite others to complement. So first question, very important one, about the secondary impacts. There was a very interesting study, I think it's still ongoing in Bangladesh, by our neighboring university, the ETH Zurich, who worked in areas that are affected by riverbank erosion, something that Dilip was also talking about. And they found that communities are displaced up to 7 times. They have moved up to 7 times because of erosion in a consecutive manner in different regions. And when they move, communities ascribe the reason for that to economic factors. They say, we are not able to grow crops, we don't have enough livelihood options, etc., while the root cause is environmental. And when they talk about if they have to move in the future, do they anticipate that they have to move again? Then they say, yes, we will have to, and it will be because of environmental reasons. So we experience the impact through economic stress, but we do know the underlying factors are climate or environmental. And most of the time, these secondary impacts are the ones that are more complex to address, more persistent and more difficult to address. So just as vulnerability is intertwined, it may happen because of your gender, your location, as Dilip was talking about. You're located, the more vulnerable people are located in more risky places. This is all over the world, right? The richer people have the higher land, the more stable land. The poorer people are in the slum areas, prone to localized flooding, or unstable areas in the mountains or close to the coast or rivers. So vulnerability is intertwined, but so are the impacts. And I think that is why we move to this framework of not only talking about adaptation in a silo and mitigation in another silo, development in a third silo, and now humanitarian in a fourth silo, but really bringing all of them together because the problem is complex. And we need all the instruments at our disposal to address it. So in certain cases, we may have to do relocation and land acquisition and humanitarian support in the face of an extreme event. One of the very important points that Fahima Van talked about was it takes communities 10 years to recover from an extreme event like the cyclone. The impacts of Ayla are still being felt by communities. So we need really functional and effective social protection measures going to the most vulnerable. We also need to use all the instruments of humanitarian response, including effective focus on relocation, resettlement. So the initial parts are done well, that is providing aid, but the longer term ones take more time and need attention, and often they're lacking in resources, right? And then we have to embed adaptation options in the development work that we do. So avoid at all cost maladaptation. What is maladaptation? In a region that is prone to changes in rainfall, introduction of irrigation as an adaptation measure or a development measure locks in communities into a certain kind of cropping system, which may not be viable in the midterm. So avoiding things or building walls, right? Building protective walls. Many a times they give a false sense of security and they again lock in the rainfall and prevent drainage, which is naturally needed. These are examples of maladaptation, and the IPCC report has many of them. So in our development work, we also need to take the midterm perspective into account as to how climate change will affect the actions that we are doing. And I would say in everything that we do, keep the perspective of mitigation as well. We always have options of using a nature-based solution versus an industrial material like cement. We always have the option of agroecological practices versus intensive agriculture with a lot of chemical fertilizers, etc. And we can talk about the responsibility, historical responsibility being elsewhere, but current responsibility is with us, and so is future responsibility. So climate resilient development would be using all these instruments in a joint up, in an integrated manner to support the people who are most vulnerable. And I think the IPCC reports have a value in providing us well-researched and the most robust evidence on how the poor are most impacted by climate. And therefore, the resources also have to go in a targeted manner to those communities. And we should all use that information, that evidence base, to strengthen our argument. For at the moment, too little money is going to adaptation. That's a fact. They're also endorsed by the IPCC findings. So after a lot of advocacy over the last 4 or 5 years, money for adaptation is going up, but still it's only 20% of the total climate finance that is coming to adaptation. There was a commitment of 100 billion per year from 2020. That has not been met, as you know, from the discussions at Glasgow and the evidence that was presented. And what is very painful is of even these limited resources, too little is going to the local area. So we have evidence that about 8 to 10% of the resources are reaching from international to national and then to the local level. And as field workers, we all know that it's the local government that communities hold responsible. So money has to flow to the local level, and decision-making also has to be localized, because adaptation options vary based on the context. And evidence, again presented in the IPCC report, also shows that only about 8 to 10% of adaptation projects allow local decision-making, local governments, local communities to have the say on what is an effective adaptation measure. We have also looked at the indigenous and traditional knowledge. It exists in various forms, very concretely in Bangladesh, in terms of how to live with floods. We have a rich experience of that, right? And that is a key resource for effective adaptation, effective climate resilient development, I would say. And if projects are designed top-down, which is the way the Green Climate Fund works, for instance, there is no space to integrate such local and traditional knowledge. And that's a very strong argument that we now have for decentralization of climate finance, to money to flow to the right entity, but also decision making to be there, because they know how to deal with the context. Now, so from the northern powers, I would say yes, too little money, but too little going to the local level. Now, the Scottish Fund is a revolutionary fund. It is for the first time that a public entity, sub-entity of the national government, recognizes historical responsibility for loss and damage, right? Not only for emission, but because industrialization started in Scotland. So it's a great step that the First Minister has taken to acknowledge that responsibility and contribute, I think it's now £2 million for loss and damage. It's not even a drop, right? It's a molecule in the pot of needs. So it's tiny, but it is politically very important. And it's very important that this money is used well. It is reaching the people who are experiencing loss and damage and not getting lost in the international system, neither in the national system in the countries where it's going. So all of you have a responsibility to see that the money reaches to the right people and is used for the right purpose at the national level. And the fund, of course, needs to grow. It has to be used effectively. It has to show impact. And then that we have the argument to make it bigger. So I hope that addresses the question of need-based allocation. I think needs are linked to geography, which impacts vulnerability. Needs are linked to economic opportunity. What are the diversification potentials for people, but also for enhancing capability, because that's our key resource for the future. So building skills of the youth, as Dilip Bhai was talking, also going beyond traditional practice. So using ICT, access to climate services, using every opportunity to build capacities, not for the next 5 years, but with a slightly longer term perspective, looking at sectors that have potential and using our most important resource, which is the human resource of developing countries, to build that capacity. With regard to gender-based violence, the IPCC report has a whole chapter on health, and we have clear evidence of climate change impacting mental health as well. Some cases on how it is leading to gender-based violence, but once again, when we come to attribution, things get much more complicated. Huh? So it cannot be simply said that climate change is leading to 10% more GBV, because COVID was also one of the big triggers for a huge explosion in gender-based violence. So many things come together, but there is very robust evidence of the mental health impacts of climate change: loss of habitation, loss of culture, loss of your roots. Many of us have experienced that, right? Uprooted from our communities, and this is a loss and pain that is intergenerational. Communities carry it within them. With regard to migration, I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that there are several communities that are also locked in. So there are women, the elderly, often children, who are not able to migrate. So the men are migrating, and they also have a very specific kind of vulnerability. So while migration needs to be assessed as an effective adaptation mechanism, focus also needs to be on people, often they're the poorest, who are not able to migrate and who are locked in, and what needs to be done for them. So I hope, Ben, I address some of the very important points that were raised, and I pass on to other colleagues then. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rupa, for making this very broad answer to many of the questions that have been asked. I nevertheless try again with Professor Dilip Dutta, if he can join us to add maybe some more words from your side on the question, especially also on the questions regarding tidal wave management. There were some questions there on local solutions. You may want to add there.
Thanks, Ben. It is rather embarrassing that I am not able to communicate you nicely because of the breaking, sound system. But while you are talking, I'm listening nicely. Anyway, what I emphasize that it has been elaborated by Dr. Rupa Mukherjee very nicely. And she has taken a very good view of the total scenario. That right at this time, we can minimize the vulnerability of, this climate change issues by the service to women and our community, because this will help them to empower. And when we talk about TRM, tidal river management, actually there are many positive and negative issues over there. Already our embankments is having a kind of pseudo security to the community. So this is a kind of thing that happening in our inner world, in our mind. And most of the current generation, who are even 50 plus years of age, they are not actually very much acquainted with it. Now they are in conflict, but this conflict is not environmental conflict, rather it's a conflict with environmental backlash. So community should be more, I think, reasonably learn the current situation so that they can put their adaptation strategy depending on the physical environment. Depending on the processes or determinants that are responsible for healthy and good, this livelihood practices. Anyway, thank you. I think I will talk while getting more chance in open, with good communication systems. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Dilip, very much for this closing words. I think it is very important, as has been mentioned many times, that it is difficult, obviously, to pinpoint the reasons and just say climate change is the reason. There are many reasons. Attribution is difficult, but that does not mean that we should not take action. I think this is the key message that I at least take from this whole discussion. And on a positive note, that there are nevertheless good solutions already there. We have good pathways that we can use, and we should not look at them in isolation, but really have a holistic approach. Rupa mentioned the whole of governance approach, to really have all different levels included, especially also the local level, because very often solutions are best found on the local level. So, unfortunately, we are running out of time. There are still a number of questions we could not directly address, but I hope that from the answers that we got from the panelists, from the results from the study that have been presented, that all of us participating here could take away some new information, got inspired by these. So I yes, looking forward now actually to see these recommendations being implemented in the field. Now I'm coming back to what I mentioned before. I would like to make a very short survey to everybody. I was asking the question about the COP27, what is the key message? I asked the panelists, what is your key message you would like to share with the global leaders in the next COP27 that will come up? And I would actually like to ask the same question to each and every of you participating in this session. You see in the chat, if you don't see it already, a link to the Mentimeter. It's the Menti. You can click on that, and then you can give just a few words on what would be your key message that you would like to share with global climate leaders, that you would make sure that this arrives. I see there are already answers coming in. Thank you very much for those that are very quick. I can read some of them. Push the
apologize for that, sir. Your session time's up. Please close this session as soon as possible.
Okay, we have to close.
We have another session, so we can please try to wrap up.
Sorry that we have to close the session. There are some comments coming in. I don't have the time, unfortunately, to read it. So I would like to just, while you are still writing, you can continue reading. I would like to thank everybody that participated today in this session. First and foremost, of course, the two presenters of the study, our participants in the panel,